Welcome back, everyone. Ready for another deep dive?
Always.
Okay, good. Today we're heading into, well, I guess you could call it the dark side of the internet, the dark web.
Ooh, exciting.
Yeah, we're going to explore the rise and fall of something called AlphaBay. Ever heard of it?
Oh yeah, AlphaBay. It was huge, like even bigger than the Silk Road, at least for a time.
Exactly. I mean, we're talking about an online black market that at one point just dwarfed everything else out there.
Mm.
So we're going to try to understand how it worked, who was behind it, and how it all came crashing down.
Sounds fascinating. Where do we even start with something like that?
Well, I guess the beginning is as good a place as any. It all started back in the early 2010s, right?
Okay.
Like when the dark web was still this mysterious, uncharted territory.
Yeah, the Wild West of the internet,
Yeah,
as some called it.
exactly. Bitcoin was just starting to gain traction. The idea of anonymity online was like really appealing to a lot of people.
Yeah, you had privacy advocates, journalists, activists.
Right. And of course, let's not forget the criminals.
Yeah, unfortunately, they were drawn to it too. All those looking to operate outside the law, so to speak.
And in 2013, after the Silk Road was shut down, there was this kind of power vacuum, right? And that's when AlphaBay really stepped in.
2014, to be precise. It was founded by this mysterious figure known only as Alpha 2. But the thing that really set AlphaBay apart was its structure. Think Amazon, but for, well, everything illegal you could imagine.
Whoa, okay, hold on. Amazon. Really?
Yeah, really. It had this user-friendly interface, easy navigation, customer reviews, the whole 9 yards. It was a game changer in terms of making the dark web, well, accessible to a wider audience, and that's part of why it exploded in popularity.
And at the helm of this digital empire was Alexandre Cases, a seemingly ordinary Canadian guy, lived in Thailand, had a tech company, the whole bit. But online, he was Alpha 2, the mastermind behind this massive criminal network.
And he made an absolute fortune, millions upon millions in Bitcoin just rolling in from every transaction on AlphaBay.
It's kind of crazy to think about, right? This double life he was leading. Like, what drives someone to create something like that? Was it just the money?
I mean, that was definitely part of it. But some experts think there might have been something more. Maybe a sense of, like, a warped idealism about creating a truly free market, completely unregulated. Or maybe it was the challenge, the thrill of it all.
It's hard to say for sure, especially since Crisis, well, he took his own life while he was in custody awaiting trial.
Yeah, it's a tragic end to a very complicated story, and it kind of underscores the fact that, behind every screen name, every avatar, there's a real person with their own motivations and, well, demons.
And in Cause's case, those demons were kind of unleashed by a pretty, well, a careless mistake.
Yeah.
Early on, he actually exposed his real email address in some of AlphaBay's automated messages.
Talk about a rookie error. I mean, pimplex91 at hotmail.com, it almost sounds like a joke.
Right. But for law enforcement, it was a gold mine.
It was the key that unlocked everything. Investigators were able to trace that email back to forum posts, social media profiles, and eventually to Kazis himself.
So they had a name, they had an email, but how do you even begin to take down a whole online marketplace like that?
Mm.
This wasn't just about arresting one guy. This was about dismantling an entire digital fortress.
It took a massive, coordinated effort from law enforcement agencies across 7 different countries. We're talking FBI, DEA, Europol, the works. They called it Operation Bayonet. And their strategy involved a pretty clever but controversial tactic. You see, alongside AlphaBay, there was another big player in the dark web market game, Hansa Market. And it just so happened that Dutch investigators had, they had managed to gain access to Hansa's servers.
Oh, wow. How'd they manage that?
It was a tip from a security researcher. Lucky break, really.
So they could have just shut it down right then and there.
They could have, but they decided to play it differently. They took control of Hansa, basically turning it into a honeypot.
Okay, wait. A honeypot, you mean like luring criminals in and then...
Exactly. They kept Hansa running, even as they were closing in on AlphaBay. All those criminals looking for a new place to do business after AlphaBay went down, they flocked to Hansa, completely unaware that they were walking straight into a trap.
And all their activity, everything they did on Hansa was being monitored, recorded.
Oh yeah, for weeks. They gathered a treasure trove of intelligence, information that led to countless arrests and investigations all over the world.
It's like something out of a movie.
It really is. And then on July 20th, 2017, 2 weeks after Kansas's death, they pulled the plug on Hansa, a coordinated shutdown, a major blow to the dark web as a whole.
So what happened next? Did it work? Did they actually manage to shut down the dark web?
Well, that's where things get even more interesting. You see, the dark web is, by its very nature, incredibly resilient. It's designed to adapt and evolve. So while AlphaBay and Hansa might be gone, the story doesn't end there. In fact, it takes a pretty unexpected turn. But we'll save that for part 2 of our deep dive.
Okay, now you've got me hooked. But before we move on, I'm curious about something. If this seemingly ordinary Canadian guy, Kazes, could build something like AlphaBay, doesn't that suggest, well, that anyone could? I mean, what does that say about how accessible this technology is, for good or for bad?
That's a really great point. And it gets to the heart of what makes the dark web such a complex issue. It's a double-edged sword, right?
Hmm.
On one hand, it can be a powerful tool for anonymity, for freedom of information, for people who need to bypass censorship.
Like whistleblowers, journalists, activists.
Exactly. But on the other hand, it gives those same tools to people with malicious intentions. And as technology keeps advancing, those lines are only going to get blurrier. The story of AlphaBay is a stark reminder of that.
So it's not as simple as good versus evil, is it?
Not at all. It's much more nuanced than that, and that's what makes it so important to understand. So where were we? Yes, the takedown of Hansa Market.
Right, the honeypot. It's
That's
crazy to think they just, let it keep running.
It was a risky move, for sure, but it paid off big time. I mean, can you imagine the amount of data they collected? Names, locations, transaction
Not
records.
much intel.
Oh, yeah. It was like Christmas morning for law enforcement. They were able to connect the dots, track down all sorts of criminal activity, stuff that went way beyond just AlphaBay. We're talking drug trafficking, money laundering, weapons dealing.
Wow, it's like a global crime ring, all stemming from this one website.
In a way, yeah. It showed just how interconnected the dark web had become, and it highlighted the challenge of trying to police this space.
Because shutting down one site doesn't solve the problem, does it?
Nope. It's like whack-a-mole. You take one down, another one pops up. And the people behind these sites, they're smart. They learn from their mistakes, they adapt.
So even after all that, after the FBI and everyone took down AlphaBay and Hansa, the dark web just kept going.
Exactly. The demand is there, so the supply will always find a way. Plus, let's not forget the other side of the dark web, the one that's not about crime.
Right, the whistleblowers, the journalists.
The activists, the people living under repressive regimes, they all rely on the anonymity that the dark web provides. It's a tool for freedom of speech, for sharing information that otherwise might be suppressed.
It's almost like we're talking about two different internets running side by side.
It's more complex than just good versus evil, that's for sure. But getting back to AlphaBay, remember Snake, Alpha 2's right-hand man.
Yeah, the one who took over after Kaz's step back.
Well, here's the twist. In 2021, the Snake relaunched AlphaBay, brought it back from the dead.
What? Seriously, I thought it was shut down for good.
It was. But someone, presumably Snake, had the foresight to, let's say, squirrel away some backups.
Wow, so even after the biggest law enforcement operation in dark web history, AlphaBay is back online.
Yep. And it didn't take long for it to gain traction again. New users, new vendors, same old illicit goods and services. It's like a digital phoenix rising from the ashes.
That's kind of terrifying, but also impressive. I mean,
Check
how
in.
do you even prevent something like that?
It's a tough question. And it gets to the heart of the dilemma we're facing with the dark web. Do you try to crack down even harder? Risk infringing on people's privacy? Maybe even drive those who use it for legitimate reasons further underground?
Or do you just, accept that it's there, that it's part of the internet now, and try to manage it as best you can?
It's a balancing act, for sure. And there's no easy answer. But one thing's for certain. The story of AlphaBay, it's far from over.
So where do we go from here? Knowing that something like AlphaBay can just reappear.
Well, it raises a lot of questions about the future of the dark web. Can it ever be truly controlled? Or is it just going to keep growing, evolving, becoming even harder to track?
It's like, on the one hand, we want to shut down the criminal activity, obviously, but on the other hand, we don't want to stifle freedom of speech or prevent people from accessing information they might not be able to get otherwise.
Right. And that's the dilemma, isn't it? How do you strike that balance? How do you protect people from harm without creating a system where everyone's being monitored all the time?
Especially when the technology is constantly changing, too. By the time you catch up to one method, they've already moved on to something new.
Exactly. It's a constant cat and mouse game. And the dark web, Well, it's designed to be slippery, hard to grasp. It's decentralized, it's encrypted, it's constantly evolving.
Which I guess is kind of the point, right?
In a way, yeah, it was created to be resistant to censorship, to control, and that's what makes it so appealing to, well, to everyone who uses it, for better or for worse.
I feel like I've learned so much about this world just from this one deep dive. It's definitely more complicated than I ever imagined.
It's a rabbit hole, that's for sure. But it's an important one to explore because whether we like it or not, the dark web is a part of our world now, and it's not going away anytime soon.
I think that's a good place to leave it for today. This whole story, it's got everything. International intrigue, a mysterious death, a website that just won't die.
And it's a story that's still being written. Who knows what the next chapter will hold?
I guess we'll have to wait and see. But one thing's for sure, it'll be fascinating to watch it unfold. And to our listeners, thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We hope you found it as thought-provoking as we did.
And remember, stay curious.
And keep diving deeper.